Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adventures in History. Sorry for the slight delay there. I neglected several things that I needed to do in preparation for stream, and I had to very quickly throw things together. Oh no, I gave a little wavy face to Matt, or a little circle line wavy thing when he first popped in. Or, I don't know, whenever he first tapped. Hello, everybody. Matt, how's it going? DCI Banks is here. I don't know if I should say, but you know what I mean, and you know what I mean, right? DCI Banks. Kyle is here. Welcome in. Cliff is here. I did get too caught up in Aristotle's stream. Yes, that's exactly what happened, and I even said as much to my wife when I was trying to slap everything together at the last minute. I was talking with Aristotle on his chat about how good peanut butter is and how good of a staple it is on field excursions. And I was talking with another guy in the chat about how if you're digging something up and you dig up a piece of thing and you're not sure if it's a piece of bone or a piece of rock, you stick it on your tongue, and if it's bone, it will stick to your tongue because the bone is porous and the spit from your tongue will basically get down little holes and make these nice little vacuums. But anyway, this is how you determine whether or not something is bone or rock. It's kind of how it goes. But anyway, fun things that everybody is super excited to hear about, right? I hope that things in your world are going as smoothly as possible. It's been a weird few days, my friends. A weird week. A weird world. I don't know. This whole year is like somewhere around the end of January. We went not only through the looking glass, but we went through the looking glass at roughly warp speed. And in going through the looking glass at such a speed, the looking glass itself sort of like bent through space and time in and upon itself and made something like some weird black hole thing that is also slowly destroying everything that we think of as normal and sane. It's maybe a little bit too deep of a metaphor, but I feel like the message is getting across. Anyway, welcome. Where things are cool, and we're going to talk about government and politics, but not in the kind of government and politics that you're probably expecting, because we're talking about old government and politics. And specifically today, we're going to be looking at old Greek politics when no one alive today was alive. So we don't have to worry about doing too much modern stuff, unless, of course, everybody just gets really interested in making direct comparisons. But we have been working on... this is bothering me, sorry. We've been working on moving through a series here that is discussing the history of government and politics. And we are on what is now our 7th episode. And we are going to be looking at specifically Greek additions to existing government and political ideology. So that's the idea. I'd rather have the looking glass. Worst we'd have to deal with is the Jabberwock. Yeah. And if we had the Vorpal blade, we could just go snicker snack and be done with the thing, right? But I don't think the Vorpal blade exists at the moment. Perhaps it's a term limit. That'd be great. Anyway, just as a bit of a reminder, I am a history teacher and sociology teacher and anthropology teacher at college. We have a now 5-year-long stream running where we've talked about various things throughout history. We've started this particular string of episodes with the history of government and politics not too long ago, in light of big shifts in government and politics, where people were asking a lot of questions that I thought were very valid and needed answers, and answers that were more substantive than just, it's the way that it's always been, or it's been that way for thousands of years, or it's an old idea, right? So we're going to try through the course of this series to answer all of the questions about how things are going now based on how things developed through time. And we are going to move fairly fast. We've already been through what is basically 290,000 years of human history, with the first first 6 episodes, and we will get several hundred years in this episode, and then in the next episode we'll get a little bit more, and we will. So next episode is going to be on Roman history, Roman government and politics. I don't like the fact that that just keeps snapping. I want it to move just a little bit. So that's just kind of what's coming down. And then we'll do feudalism. And then we'll start talking about how we came out of feudalism and new ideas that we were coming up with. And fun times, fun times. Since antiquity is becoming my hated. I'm not sure exactly what that means, Tuna, but good to see you, Tuna. Hope you're doing well. Your hated response or your hated phrase. Yeah, since antiquity is a really vague answer that people put to make them sound more intelligent in a paper. It's very similar to, for ceremonial reasons, right. Right. You went to the Isle of Sark as a teen. Interesting. Which was the last feudal state in Europe. Indeed. That's pretty cool. I've never been in that area. I would like to go, but I've never been. So, alas. No, you're good. Okay. So where are we going to pick up? We're going to pick up with basically Greece, the country and area that you see here. Now, I have this expanded into not just the Balkan Peninsula, but basically the larger Greek world, because as we remember, because everybody remembers everything in history, the Greek world was not just here on the Balkan Peninsula, where the modern-day country of Greece was. There are also Greek cities over here in what they called Ionia, over here in the southern part of Italy, over here on Syracuse. And if I really, really wanted to, I could zoom out and even do a little bit like this, because there were Greek city-state colonies set up around the coast of the Black Sea. So maybe that's actually a little bit more appropriate if we do it kind of like this. Anyway, so the Greeks are going to obviously inherit a long history of human government and politics. We've already covered all of the prehistoric types of government and politics, and we have covered in depth the growth from villages to towns to city-states to countries and then to empires. And the people that arrived in Greece are going to have all of this knowledge, and they're going to be familiar with these types of governments. So we don't necessarily need to begin at the beginning of Greek history to get this stuff. What we need to pick up is the Greek classical age, which is going to start at the earliest in the middle and late 800s BC and continues through basically Alexander the Great in the 330s BC. So about 500 years of time, right? This is sort of the classical age of Greece. And during this period of time, we're going to see them come up with a lot of new ideology when it comes to doing government and politics. And one of the biggest ideas that we don't usually talk about when we talk about Greece is citizenship. Usually, if we talk about like Greek politics, people are going to want to talk about democracy, right? And obviously, democracy is a big deal, and we are going to clearly talk about democracy later on in this discussion. But it's worth pointing out that democracy itself was not necessarily the preferred way of government in Greece, and it was not necessarily the majority way that most Greek cities did their government. Now, if you're reading a lot of Western political apologists, they're of course going to sort of glorify democracy from the Greek world, and they're especially going to glorify like the Athenian democracy. They're going to talk about all of the benefits and da 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 da. And I'm not trying to take anything away from all that stuff. I will say though that there is quite a bit of bias in Western historical and political and governmental writing towards democracy in the Greek world, and it gets a lot better shake than it probably deserves. So we'll try to demystify some of this stuff throughout the course of the discussion tonight, and we'll make some really clear delineations between how, for example, most countries today do democracy and how the Greeks did democracy, because while they have many similarities, there are also some significant differences. And we're not going to talk about democracy the whole time. But let's talk a little bit about this idea of citizenship, because the concept of citizenship is a really important one and is going to have a lot of implications, and in many ways sort of is a precursor to a lot of the other political changes that the Greeks are going to make. So first we kind of have to ask this question: what is citizenship, and why is this a big deal? Why is this a development or a new type of political technology or governmental technology that we're creating? The idea that we have of citizenship today is broadly considered by most historians, archaeologists, I guess archaeologists, but political science people, to be a really a Western thing. We do see evidence of like rudimentary sort of citizenship stuff in non-Western historical groups, but typically the shift here is going to be an interesting one where the membership of the group becomes less a membership of the family and more of a membership of the city. And this has really big implications mentally, and it has really big implications politically and governmentally, right? So if we look at most other historical groups, if we go to, say, India or China or Japan, you're going to find family governmental ideology being the thing, right? We have big families, we have clan structures, we have extended lineages that are going to be in power. We have much more focus on family-centric dynamics inside of our government, and you don't necessarily get the same concept of citizenship historically outside of the Western world. And this is really where a lot of stuff is going to start diverging. We might ask ourselves a lot of questions today about why is the government in China responding this way to the things that America does. If we did this in America, here's how we would respond, but why does China do something differently? A lot of this is because they have a very different view on how government and politics works, and they have a lot more at play sometimes than what we do. One of the biggest issues that we're dealing with right now is the fact that there's an entire concept of honor or saving face that exists in the Chinese government structure that does not necessarily exist here in America to the same extent. This is one of the reasons why we have such high tensions and the tariffs have gone through the roof between America and China right now, right? So there are differences that start developing, and this is where they really do. So once we establish fairly conclusively here that the concept of citizenship is a Western one, then we have to ask ourselves, what does it really mean? Like, what is it? What is citizenship? And this is really kind of hard to tell. It's not necessarily just I am a citizen of this city or I'm a citizen of this country, so I have all of these rights and I have all of these privileges. There's a bunch of gray area here, if we're just being honest, right? And I'm always a proponent of showing the gray area, explaining why it exists, and then explaining why I think we don't really know the answer to this. But the real question here in the ancient world, specifically dealing with Greek citizenship, the question is this a legal thing, or is this like a social construct thing, right? Is this a mental thing where I think of myself as a citizen of this city, so I am a citizen of this city? Or is it that there was an actual legal distinction that differentiates me from a non-citizen of this city? And if so, what are the mechanisms of doing that? And it's not always cut and dry. The sources don't necessarily talk about citizenship that much. We have to do a lot of implication derivation here, where we're looking at the way that certain things happened inside of the Greek political structure, and we see references to things like, and the citizens met at the assembly, and then we have to ask ourselves, okay, so what does that say about citizenship? Did all citizens get to go to the assembly? What was the role of a citizen at the assembly, et cetera, et cetera? Now, we do have some texts that are going to be very descriptive about a lot of politics, but many of these are going to be very pointed critiques of things, and they're very obviously going to have a lot of an angle, right? Glaperon, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. Sam is here. Welcome in. No, it's easy. It means you have a city full of Zen practitioners living on a boat. Perhaps, but do they think of themselves as citizens? If they're on a boat floating around, do they consider the boat to be a governmental body that they have a certain share in? And if they picked up a random person floating around in the water, would that person become a citizen simply by being in the boat? Or would they have to think of themselves as a citizen, or would they have to then also do something to earn citizenship? So all of these things are sort of not necessarily existential questions, but they're deeper things that we don't always have the answers to. Does China's Tong system of family enter into what we're talking about? If we're talking about the differentiation between Eastern systems of political and governmental organization versus Western stuff, yes. The government of the family in the clan structure and the way that they have structured that is going to be a lot of the kind of basis of stuff, where we would have in a Western structure something like a police force. You might get grabbed up by a random person and dragged to your granddad, and your granddad would then be expected to enforce the family's honor or protect it by disciplining you. But you are part of the family because of birth, and you're part of the clan because of kinship. The difference here is you're part of the city because of what? What gives the city, or the word polis, which we're about to get to, what gives that the right to exercise any authority over you? So the citizenship thing here is a little bit more nebulous, especially at the beginning when we don't know exactly how it worked. Whereas we know quite a bit about the stuff like, the structure you mentioned, because we still see that even into the modern world, right, to a certain extent. What's up, Succubus? Welcome in. Glaperon says, Americans follow for MacArthur policy for trade alliances, Toyota, Japanese, TSMBC, Taiwanese, South Korean for Nokia, for crush Chinese empires or sell Pacific Asia for China. Okay. Glaperon, I'm not 100% sure exactly what that means. You are welcome to restate if that's a statement, or clarify if that's a question. I'd be happy to try to address it. Don, what's up, man? Welcome in. Good to see you. We've got Dawn Does Math in the chat. If I could type the right way, it would work. There we go. Everybody should go follow Don Does Math. He's a math streamer, but also does gaming and sometimes does chat stuff. I caught him reading a book with some friends on stream about relativity, general relativity. And I got one of the questions right, and I felt super smart for the entire day and even told my wife about it. I was so far out of my intellectual depth hanging out with Don and all of his friends that are like talking like quantum physics, and I'm like, what if it was this? And they're like, oh, that's actually kind of a good idea. And I was like, yeah. Wouldn't this question actually go back to the Sumerians rather than the Greeks? Sam, we've already talked all the way through the Sumerians, but the Sumerians did not have a concept of citizenship. We don't see that really happen until we get to the Greeks. We've already talked about Sumerian city-states and the rise of the first kings and how we have structures where kings and governments are being built with religions as aid, and then our city-states are expanding and we're making kingdoms, and then our kingdoms are expanding and we are running into empires, and then we have to run an empire through bureaucracy. So we've already gone through quite a bit of that stuff. If you would like, Sam, you can check out the YouTube channel. I have all 6 existing previous episodes of this series on the YouTube in a playlist, so you can check them out and catch up if you are interested. Citizenship doesn't have the I am a Roman feel yet, does it? We're not there yet, Succubus, but we're going to be there next stream of this series, likely. We're going to get some of that today. What's up, Silver? Good to see you. All right, so we don't necessarily know exactly what the Greeks thought about citizenship early on, and what this does is it starts another argument. Because it's sort of hard to pin down exactly the thought of what citizenship is, then some people say, well, the Greeks didn't even have it then. It really wasn't an idea that came around until we got to the Enlightenment and we started doing stuff like political science. So that's when we discovered or came to the realization that were things like natural rights, and we started associating them with membership of a country or a state. And so this Enlightenment as idea is really where our concept of citizenship came from. I get that argument. I don't necessarily follow it, and I don't necessarily ascribe to it. I do think that there was a significant enough historical basis for citizenship to exist in the ancient and in antiquity. Just kind of throwing that in there for tuna. But in the Greek and Roman world, and then other states after that, I think we have a pretty clear idea of how citizenship works. The biggest issue is that it gets very, very fuzzy, of course, after Rome collapses, and a lot of the advanced governmental policies that we have get basically reset in a lot of ways. So I don't think that we have to wait until the Enlightenment to have citizenship, but this is my opinion. You're welcome to read all of the material and make up your own minds here. But we do need to have this debate about ideology. So if we are going to say that there was citizenship in Greece, which I think that we can say very fairly and very conclusively. We might not be able to understand exactly what all of it was, but I'm pretty sure we can say that it was there. We have to ask ourselves what it meant, right? What does it mean to be a citizen of a city? Why do we have this distinction in the first place? And there are a lot of potential answers here. Some people are going to say, oh, well, really, citizenship is just sort of an extended recognition that you are going to have to fight in the military, right? So the way that this works is you live in the city, or you live in the very close surrounding area of the city, and when the king calls up the army, you are expected to show up to go fight in the army, right? So that separates you from somebody else that doesn't have to show up to fight in the army, right? So I live too far away from the city. The king's not going to call me up into the army, so I'm not really part of the city. But that starts making this mental delineation between I'm part of the city and I'm not part of the city, right? And we've started to create categories and labels here, and when we do that, we like to have words for these things, right? We like to have reasoning behind it. So maybe citizenship began as this way to say I'm part of the military if the king calls it up, or I'm not part of the military if the king calls it up. And then it sort of grew with benefits from there, right? Well, if you're part of the army, maybe you get a little bit of the spoils if we're going to separate loot from the war. So this is sort of like maybe a payment for your military service. Or maybe you get a year off of taxes if you fought in the war. So there's some now tangible benefit attached to this concept of part of the city or not part of the city, right? So we can see how that might be like a bit of an incentive to draw lines between peoples. You have the city-states of Italy where citizenship becomes literal again. Yeah, so that's way later on though. That's probably 3,000 years past where we're at. You get to own slaves, or you get to that's actually one of the differentiations here. One of the ways that people say that citizenship began was to determine who could be enslaved and who could not be enslaved. And if you were a citizen of the city, the thought goes that you could not be enslaved because you were part of the functioning of the city, whereas if you were not part of the functioning of the city, you could be enslaved. So this is an argument that a lot of political scientists and historians have about whether or not the existence of slavery was the primary driver behind citizenship. We do see some evidence of this going fairly far back ideologically, the difference between people groups and whether or not they could be enslaved or they were protected from being enslaved. So that's a potential question here. There is also the question of whether or not the original concepts of citizenship were based on some sort of social stratification. Are we saying that the original citizens of our city were the ones that had a certain amount of money or a certain amount of property, and because they were wealthy or of a certain amount of wealth or socioeconomic status, that they were allowed to participate in the function of the city because they had more tangible involvement with the function of the city? And after a certain period of time, perhaps that was expanded to everybody within the city after there was social class dysfunction. Maybe so. All of these have legitimate answers. Another potential justification for it was to reinforce the idea of civic participation. Maybe we have citizenship so that the people that live here feel like they are involved, right? Maybe I distinguish them. Maybe if I'm a king and I am trying to secure my position on the throne, if I extend citizenship to a group of people and distinguish them from others and give them perhaps certain benefits or certain tax breaks or certain, I don't know, whatever, maybe that is a reinforcement of the fact that they're a part of the city, but this also keeps me a well-liked individual because I'm treating my people well, right? So maybe, but the answer here is like we're not sure, right? Glapron, I'm going to be honest and say that I don't know what you're talking about, my friend. So if the problem is on my end, I apologize. But if you've got some specific points that you want to make, maybe try wording those a little bit differently, a little bit more clearly, or with a sort of a through line. Yeah, the sense of responsibility is a thing here. Like, if you're part of the city, you're going to fight for it more, right? If you are part of the city, you're going to want it to be upset less. you're going to want less disruption of civic life because you're going to benefit from the peace that's there. So you're going to be less likely to rebel. You're going to be more likely to participate. You're going to be happier. You're going to be more docile, right? So perhaps this was an early version of, bread and circuses appeasing the masses kind of thing, right? So there are a lot of questions as to what is the original motivation behind citizenship, and the answer here ultimately is we just don't know. It could be all of these, it could be some of these, it could be none of these, right? We don't really know. We don't know where it came from originally. We don't know, we don't have a document that says, and thus the first citizen was recognized or anything like that. So it's okay to say these things. And it's good to say these things because a lot of historians and political science people and even anthropology people that talk about this and sociology people like to present that we know everything about everything, but that's not the case, right? We just don't know everything about everything. And it's okay to not know everything. We can know a lot of things, and we can make really good inferred guesses about other things, but we can't know everything all the time, right? And that's totally okay. That's why we keep researching, right? Danger in speculation is taking it for fact, for certain. How early were civilizations doing censuses? Would they have had to draw the line with who to count somehow? So we do know that censuses start showing up pretty early on after citizenship becomes established. We see some evidence of some of this stuff happening in the Greek world. It's not necessarily a census, though. It's more of a head count for the military, where I want to make sure that I know how many people I can call up to be in the army if I need to call the army. So it's more like almost like a draft lottery kind of thing. Not necessarily a draft lottery, but more like you have to sign up for the draft when you hit 18 kind of thing. There was actually a position called census or censor in the Roman world, though. When the Roman Republic established itself, not too long after where we're talking about, by the way, the Roman Republic has a position called censor, and their whole job is to run the census. And they decided who was in what particular category, patrician or plebeian, and who got to be considered rich enough to be patrician, and stuff like that. So what you're looking for here is like a doomsday book kind of thing, that where everybody gets recorded so that you're making sure that you're paying your taxes. The tax structure of the ancient world is quite different than the one that we have now. Usually what happens is that in a big kingdom, your king is going to decide with his ministers how much tax needs to be levied in the entire kingdom, and then they're going to send this out to their individual people that are governors of cities or governors of provinces, and then those people that are in the provinces or in the cities are going to have tax collecting people, and their job is basically to go door to door through everybody. And we're not necessarily interested in making sure that we have an organized list, because all we're really interested in doing is making sure that we hit the tax mark, right? If I send the king the amount of taxes I'm supposed to, the king doesn't really care how many people I took it from. The king just cares that he gets his tax money. Now, of course, I'm going to make that tax a little bit larger so that I can skim some off of it. So I might be much more interested in how many people are in my territory, but my tax collectors are going to be people that everybody knows, and they're going to know everybody else. And there was a significant reason why tax collectors were seen as scummy people in the ancient world, because they knew everybody and everybody's business, and they knew where to find you. So if you got sent to a specific city to do tax collecting, you knew everybody there, and you knew how much everybody needed to pay. And if somebody new had moved in, you found them real quick. And you basically made sure that they deposited their requirements. The lowest level of the tax structure was the one that was the most hands-on. That is a very different idea than the way that we do it today, where we have in America the IRS, who is a federal agency that is very hands-on, and we are the ones that are supposed to sort of walk to them and say, here's our stuff. The king is going to know how much money he needs from each noble lord under him, and each noble lord is going to know how many or how much he needs to get from each sub-lord, right? And then those sub-lords are all going to have tax collectors that need to get stuff from everybody, and they're going to know everybody. That's a great question, though, Don. Great question. Were ancient cities walled? Yes, they were. During this time period, we're going to start... we had already seen walled cities. We start seeing walled cities back as soon as cities start. Some of the oldest pre-cities that we can point at still had walls, even though they weren't necessarily cities.
I'm Spartacus.
Claire. Claire is Spartacus. Claire, thank you so much for being Spartacus for a year. For a whole year. Thank you so much for your support, Claire. It is, as always, very much appreciated. We see walled cities going all the way back to the beginning of when we have cities. We can even argue that there were Neolithic walled areas. They weren't really cities at that point, but they were walled villages and stuff like that. So yeah, the big stone stuff that we have in Greece at this time is actually quite impressive. So you're going to get really, really, really big walls with towers, and the tops of the walls are big enough to march people down. Claire, thank you so much for the corgi bits. They are adorable as always. All right, so this is citizenship. Why do we have it? There's a lot of debate. Where does it start? Around this time. How does it start? Not really sure. But we can come to a new idea, and that is this word. Polis. The polis. So this is actually a governmental sort of breakthrough, a new level of sort of governmental ideological technology here, right? So obviously polis is just the Greek word for city, right? But when we use the word polis, and when Greek people use the word polis, they meant more than just the physical location and the buildings that made up the city, right? We see them using this in many cases to mean all of the residents of the city. So when we refer to the good of the polis, we're not here just talking about, keeping up the roads and making sure that the wall is in good repair, and making sure that we've got good, clean water everywhere. We're here talking about all of the people that live in the city. But this is an interesting shift, because we're not necessarily just talking about the residents that live in the city. Now we're talking about the city and the residents in some sort of hybrid or some sort of combination. And when we start thinking about ourselves as part of this city, this is going to have a lot of implication. It's going to have ripple effects that affect a lot of other things along the way, right? So we can also see this referred to in many cases as not just the people that live in the city, but the dependent people around the city, right? So when we say we are going to defend the polis of Sparta, we're not necessarily just talking about the city of Sparta. We're also talking about the city around Sparta and everybody that has to get caught up into the Spartan army, and everybody that pays taxes to the Spartan kings, or everybody in the system, sort of. So now we're sort of including this larger ideology that you are part of our group, right? We've already talked about othering other people and the idea of us versus them, but here we're talking about us versus theming people with some sort of new governmental ideology that's got political implications, right? We start using this as a personal identity. We start seeing writers describe themselves as, I am a member of the Polis, like it's like a club or a group, and they say that I am a citizen of this polis, and that is part of who they consider themselves to be. And what we're branching out into here is social world. We're branching out into cultural world, and each one of our little city states that we have is going to start having this identity that is part of not just who they are, but how they think about themselves, right? So this is a really important development. And I know that a lot of these things sound very small, right? Like, who cares if I think of myself as the resident of a city? In today's world, we have such a sort of, we have kind of a callow relationship with our citizenship. We don't necessarily treasure this in the same way that somebody in the ancient world did. We don't necessarily cherish these things or think deeply about these things in the same way that ancient people did. If I want to move a city, I just pick up and move a city. It's not as easy to do that in the ancient world, right? If I want to move a state over, I just file a new piece of paper and they send me a different license plate, and I get a new driver's license, and then boom, I'm registered to vote in that city or that state. That's not how it would have worked in the ancient world. We don't see the word metropolis into the modern day. That's a modern use of the word. So the ideology here behind Polis is big, because we're going from not having this idea to having this idea. Whereas in today, like, it's just so passe that, like, we don't really care. Puppy is fine. Puppy is still wearing the cone. Will probably be for a month or so. But mostly doing fine. Probably asleep on the couch right now. Polis is also where we get our word politics from, right? Polis is described as the politics, or the word politics is the things of the city, right? And it's very vague for a reason, because our concept of polis is sort of like a kind of a nebulous thing where we have lots of different ways that we apply the polis. We're also going to have lots of different things that apply to the things of the city, right? Brian, she had she got bitten by something, and she kept licking on the bite until it turned into something called a granuloma, which is basically just a big growth that is full of basically malfunctioning immune cells. So she is having to wear the cone of shame when she is not being attended, and we are having to put steroid spray on it to make it go down. It has receded quite a bit, and the hair on it is starting to grow back, but it's still going to be a while before she's completely off it. It doesn't seem to be bothering her that much anymore. She doesn't like wearing the cone, but she still runs around as if she's the giant goofball that she is. And most of the day she doesn't have to wear it because we're watching her. Is it born from places that don't have a king? What is it? What is the it to which you refer? All right. So, things of the city. It can also mean affairs of the state. Or it can also mean the art of government. So, if we talk about politics and we start seeing it being used here as a thing to study, we are now something that we can, we're moving towards something that we can use to start gamifying it, which I know is what everybody wants to do with every service now, is gamify it, right? But the idea here is, if you can study the things of the city, or if you can study the affairs of the state, you can get better at those things. And if you can get better at those things, now you can start turning it into an art. And we have people that are going to become our first politicians. See, there we go. Because when we start thinking differently, we start organizing our ideas differently, and we come up with this idea of citizenship, and we add this to the idea that we're developing of a polis being something more than just the physical location, something that transcends us as an individual that we represent together, that we can also use as an identity. Well, then we're getting people to think in a certain way, and if we can control the way that people think, then we can do government, right? Government, meant like mind. Yeah. So a citizenship born from places that don't have a king. No, there are plenty of Greek city-states that have monarchies, and can consider themselves citizens. We're going to get to sort of the standard concept of Greek governments here in just a second. We're sort of building towards that stuff. All right, so if we have a citizenship concept and we have a polis, how does it work, right? You've done a close reading of Plato's Republic once and Aristotle's Politics a couple of times. If you really pay attention to what they say, it's whack. It kind of is. It's not necessarily internally consistent, and especially in Plato's Republic, let me say this, Unreal Brian. One of the things that we as modern readers miss in Plato's Republic is that he is trying to describe a Platonic ideal, right? Now, if you're a philosopher, and I know that you hang around in a lot of philosophy chats and do a lot of thinking, like that's pretty easy for you to pick up on. But a lot of people pick up Plato's Republic and they're like, oh, this is just his version of how he thinks government should run. And it is, but it's how government should run if everything worked perfectly. And Plato wasn't dumb enough to assume that everything was always going to work the right way, which is why a lot of the stuff that he does with his sort of divergence of here's how it should work, here's how it could work, but here's how it might work. We read this and he's like, well, wasn't he just arguing for something completely different like 5 pages ago? And he was, but he wasn't arguing it from the same point of view. He was arguing from this ideal version where if everything worked perfectly and humans weren't idiots, here's how it could go if everything was going to go for the best, right? And then he'll give like a tangent and go, and here's how other people have tried to do that, and he'll try to put himself in that position and sort of argue from their angle, and then he'll also say, like, here's probably how it's going to end up, though. We should do it this way, we have done it this way, but most of the time it's going to end up like this. So the internal inconsistencies get a little much because it's very, very heady, right? Plato obviously is a philosopher and was writing the Republic as a way to sort of explain the philosophy of politics. And this gets back to the idea of doing politics, right? It's not just a thing that we think of, it's a thing that we can also do. How do we do it the right way? And how do we have the most perfect government? But Plato also argues a lot for, so Plato's an Athenian, spends a lot of time in Athens, but he argues for the ideal version of government to be run by a king, which is something that the Athenians didn't really like. So if you know that he lives in Athens and hates the average Athenian doesn't really like the idea of a king, why would Plato argue for a king? And then you have to understand that he's not arguing for just any old monarch. What he's actually arguing for is this concept of an enlightened philosophical king that rules through not necessarily divine justice, but a perfect logical and rational application of justice, which he also then sort of identifies as not necessarily being possible because humans, again, are kind of dumb. So there's a lot of stuff going on and a lot of that stuff. And Aristotle, of course, is going to come behind this gigantic work of importance and try his best to critique that. Aristotle was a student of Plato, but very clearly had substantially different concepts of ideology from Plato. And instead of going with the concept of ideals or going with the sort of more idyllic interpretation of things, Aristotle is going to focus on doing things virtuously, and if you're going to be inside of government, you need to do things the right way because it's the right way of doing things. And he has a bit of a different slant. He takes some of the stuff from Plato. Like, Plato's got a lot of ideas about how people in the government should operate, and Aristotle likes a lot of these things, especially the stuff where government should be by people that are good at what they're doing and for the general good. These are things where Plato and Aristotle overlap, obviously. And I'm getting really, really deep into the weeds here. If you haven't ever read any of this stuff, don't feel intimidated by it. You can read it and understand all of it. I'm talking very rapidly because this is something that I'm very familiar with. So you're not necessarily going to be running into this gigantic wall of opacity if you want to read some of this stuff. I ramble, and I have a lot of these ideas sort of set up to ramble, right? What's up, Cave Geek? Welcome in. Good to see you. All right. So if we've got Greek citizenship, what can we say about it? What do we actually know about it? What can we 100% prove? Well, there are some shared criteria that do seem to show up in most, if not all, of the individual examples of citizenship that we have. So what are some base level criteria? Well, base level criteria number one, you're going to be male, biologically male. You are that there's just not really any way around this in the Greek world. When a lot of modern day people think about the Greek world and they think about Greek democracy and they're like, oh, such an enlightened phase and everybody could vote. No. Women weren't even considered for citizenship in most situations. You did not necessarily have to speak the language. Property owning. You had to have some level of property. And this is, again, where a lot of people go, oh, well, so citizenship is really just an outgrowth of having a proprietary interest in the well-being of the polis. Maybe so. Not currently enslaved. This is a pretty clear sticking point here. You had to be a person that was free of any enslavement claim. You also had to be a non-medic. So this is METIC. The word here, medic, is a person from another place that happens to be staying in this city. So if you are from another polis and you visit my polis, just because you have citizenship in your polis doesn't mean that you can apply that citizenship to my polis. So citizenship doesn't necessarily transfer between political units. Claire says, work has kicked your butt this week. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope that it gets better for you. So you're going to head to bed. All right. But you'll catch the VOD. Okay, cool. It should be up later tonight, and then it should be on YouTube fairly quickly, Claire. But thanks again for the subscription, and I hope you get good sleep and rest up. And I hope that work stops kicking your butt. What's up, Flask? Welcome in. All right. So male, property owning, not enslaved, and of this area, right? Of this city. Now, we do see some differences. Not every individual Greek city-state is going to treat citizenship exactly the same way. You're going to start seeing differences pop up pretty quickly. For example, there are age requirements. So in Athens, if you were over the age of 18 and were male and property owning and not enslaved and of Athens, then you could be considered for citizenship, and you kind of had citizenship. In Sparta, you had to get all the way to 30, and you had to be able to successfully survive the military training and about 20 years of military activity. So prior to that, if you were, 18 or 20 or even 28, you really didn't have full citizenship. You had to survive. Spartans were very different, right? We have very different concepts of citizenship in these cities. Some of the cities required you to have familial connections where your parents had to be citizens or your parents had to own property in the city prior to that. So this encouraged people to stay put and not transfer their wealth to other polities. And in certain cities, we pretty clearly see the origins of aristocracy, where you kind of get citizenship if you are on this list of big families, where to get added to that list of big families, your family had to do something spectacular or become very wealthy or, bribe your way onto it, or something else. So they kind of had lists of big families, and if you were part of this family, you were a citizen. So it's not a uniform concept. This is another difference where in today's world, if you're a citizen of the United States, we all know how you got it. You were either born here or your parents were citizens. Boom, that's how you got it. And you are a citizen from birth. You don't get all the rights until certain ages, but you are a citizen from birth, and you have all the legal protections from birth. That's not the same in a lot of these ancient cities. If you were not a citizen, you did not qualify for a lot of things. In Athens, if you weren't 18, you were still considered property of your family, basically, right? You did not have protection under the law until you were of age and of citizenship. If something happened to you, like let's say somebody killed my 16-year-old son, if I was a citizen, I would have to bring suit against the person that did the killing. There was not necessarily any sort of what we might call state-run prosecutorial service that would go, oh, that person killed a citizen, we need to go get them. That's just not the way that it happened. History lessons are necessary to get perspective. Yeah, that's it's a big part of why I talk about stuff, is to hopefully apply perspective to things. All right. So, if we are a citizen of a polis, what can we hope to get? What are our rights? This is also going to be varied, and it's really up to the individual cities. Most of the cities are going to allow you to speak at public assemblies if you are a citizen. Most cities are going to have prohibitions on certain types of punishments if you are a citizen, and most citizens are going to be guaranteed some version of legal due process. Most of these cities are going to have some version of a judicial system. They vary wildly. Some of these are going to be religious judicial systems. Some of them are just the Council of Elders. Some of them are actual judges with juries. Some of them are going to be tribunals of military type judgment. There are a bajillion different due process options here, but citizens typically are going to have some level of guarantee of legal due process. And we look at these things and go, oh yeah, that's pretty basic. But this was a huge deal in the ancient world, right? When a citizen of a city could walk outside of the city and kill a non-citizen just because, with no legal recourse for that killing, being able to have due process in the event of a murder is a huge deal. When somebody that doesn't have citizenship does something bad and they get literally flayed alive as punishment, but you'll never get flayed alive. Even if you get the death penalty, they'll just chop your head off, which is really quick. That is a gigantic benefit, right? When we look at this in comparison to the alternative, we start understanding how big of a deal this citizenship thing is. You want citizenship. If you can get it, you want it, and you want to keep it, because the alternative is sucky, right? Today it's just like, oh, well, I could just go to another country and apply for citizenship, and I'll, get rights. They'll take care of me. It's also worth pointing out that if we, and I hesitate to bring this up right now, but I think it's actually a good point to bring this up. In the modern world today, so if you're watching the VOD, or if you're watching this on YouTube at some time in the future, it is April of 2025. And if you want to go back and look at historical stuff, you can do so. But I think it's worth pointing out in America that we are once again learning the privilege of actual citizenship. And we're learning that by looking at people that don't have full citizenship and the stuff that's happening to them around us right now. And as horrible as that is, if it can serve any positive, and I'm stretching for a silver lining, and this is not a good thing that I wish to continue, right? But if we are stretching and grasping for a silver lining, perhaps people are understanding once again in our world how important the difference is between having citizenship and not having citizenship, right? I hope that we kind of wake back up to this stuff, right? And that's kind of all that I'll say about that, but I think everybody kind of sees what's happening, right? Okay, so we have a polis, we have citizenship. Let's talk about some versions of government, right? What kind of governments are we going to have? Well, we'll go with the good old-fashioned monarchy. But we get to talk a little bit here about Greek, because the title of tonight is Polis and Arkhos. Right? What's this word Arkhos? That's where the archy comes from, right? This is rule, specifically rule of law. And when we're talking about monarchy, we're talking about the rule of one, right? So we are describing a form of government that was in the Greek world. It was some of the oldest stuff that existed. This, again, is something that we've covered as an example of government going really, really far back in time. The thing here is that the Greeks seem to not really care very much for this. As these newer ideas develop, the number of monarchies starts to shrink pretty significantly and pretty quickly. This is passed down through inheritance, which a lot of Greek political thinkers don't really like very much. This is something that a lot of people have in common with modern concepts of political thinking, right? Where, just because you are related to somebody doesn't mean you're going to be an effective leader. But you still do see monarchies in the Greek world. And this very frequently in the early part of the Greek world is just the first time that we see a new city-state kind of come into the game. A new player has entered the game, and they're going to be a monarchy for a little while, and then they start to grow and they get more in contact with these other cities that have different styles of government and different political concepts, and we're going to see kingdoms and specifically monarchies start to kind of fade out. By the time we get to the height of the classical era, you don't really see very many kingdoms at all. What you're going to see more frequently is a version of a monarchy that the Greeks call tyranny, right? They do distinguish between the two. Monarchy is rule that is inherited, so the rule of one that is inherited. Tyranny is the rule of one that was seized, right? So tyranny is a different form of government where we have one person, but they stole it. They took it by force. They were at the head of an army, or they did some sort of coup, or they assassinated somebody and then weaseled their way into power. But what happens, especially in later versions of Greek government during the height of the classical age, is that you will see tyrants who will seize the throne, and then they will attempt to display themselves as monarchs by making some sort of distant familial connection with a previous monarch. They'll say, oh, well, I'm the the great 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 grandnephew of the last king. And they'll say, I'm not a tyrant, I'm just reclaiming my family's throne. And there's a lot of political wrangling here because we've now entered the concept of politics. We now have the art of government, and we start seeing how people use this, creatively, perhaps. What's up, Snowlock? Welcome in. Yeah, so we've been doing a new series here for the last few months, talking about the history of government and politics, and it is absolutely relevant because this came directly out of people asking, like, how does this thing work in the government? How does this thing work in politics? And I wanted to answer all of the questions thoroughly, so why not a new series where we just talk about this specifically? But good to see you, Snowlock. Hope you're doing well. Hope everything's working for you. Forgeries. Are you talking about people that are like trying to forge documents to show that they're kings? I mean, I'm sure that happens sometimes, but it's not necessarily like a common theme or something like that. You don't see the tyrants showing up and having a professional forger making sure that everybody can show it. They don't really have like patents of nobility. They don't really have a lot of physical documentation for family stuff at this time anyway. So there's not like a birth certificate that exists at this time. There's not really a death certificate that exists at this time. If you say that you're kin to somebody, you kind of just have to have the story that works, right? So you can say, well, my father was so-and-so, and his father was so-and-so, and his father was so-and-so, so obviously I am so-and-so. And if other people accept this, it's probably going to work. If other people don't accept this, it's just not going to work. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's just whether or not you can say it convincingly enough and get enough people to believe you. I'm absolutely all for it, especially since I'm one of those people. Well, I mean, this is for you then, Snowlock. Right? So tyranny is different than monarchy because tyranny is the rule of one that is seized, right? The tyrant is one who has taken the position without justification, or the justification is violence, right? So tyrants would also very frequently try to set up monarchies where I am a tyrant, I have seized the throne, I will leave the throne to my child will no longer be a tyrant, my child will then be a monarch, right? So we're trying to legitimize this through heredity. So these two are very closely related ideologically, but you start seeing more of the tyranny stuff later, and you really see more of the monarchy stuff earlier. So if there's not tyranny or monarchy, well, what is there? Well, I mean, I guess we can go ahead and talk about what a lot of people expected us to talk about, which is democracy. Is heredity generally considered legitimizing? Frank, first, aloha. Second, in the original Greek world, heredity still had a lot to do with things. As the classical era progresses and you get more political ideology that grows out of these different political experiences, heredity becomes less and less important. It also starts to distinguish the Greek world from outsiders. The Greeks are actually fairly proud of the fact, in many cases, that they don't rely on heredity, whereas other countries do, especially when there's a really powerful king or monarch in another country and then their kid is not as effective. The Greeks really like going, well, if you didn't rely on heredity so much, you might be able to put a better person on the throne like we do. And they kind of like rubbing it in. The Greeks are very aware historically of their not necessarily uniqueness, but their willingness to experiment with politics, whereas most other countries at the time were going to be very hidebound to the old version of stuff, right? I can see it for property, but it's weird that right to rule could be conveyed so. Well, so Frank, this is, if we go back to where heredity started, we start seeing a lot of the need for the hereditary monarch to justify the position. This is why we talked so much in, I think it was maybe stream 5, or maybe it was stream 4. I can't remember exactly which one it was in this series. We started talking so much about the need for monarchs that don't have a direct connection with their people to have external validation, which is why they started reaching out and working a lot with the religion, right? So if the religion can supply a valid excuse and say the gods favor this family, or the gods have chosen this family line, or the family line in charge is related to the gods, then we get the heredity being validated, not just because it's father son or mother daughter, but by some other external force that is going to be bigger than the average person, right? The gods must all be crazy. Maybe so. Autocracy versus democracy. I'm not sure exactly what the angle. So the word autocrat and autocracy is not something that the ancient Greeks used. That's another one of these more modern terms. But we can't talk about democracy. And you're like, well, where's Arkhos? Why isn't it demoarchy or something like that? Well, that's because the word that we're using in this form is actually with a K. It's kratos. And it means the power of. So democracy is the power of the power of the people. So we're not the rule of the people. Democracy is a representation of the power of the people, and this itself is an important concept. But anyway, what is Greek democracy? Well, it's not really preferable in a lot of people's ideas. If you read a lot of the Greek writing, they kind of see democracy as a negative, and they don't really like the idea that that democracies existed. So now, obviously, there are some cities that sort of embrace democracy and blow it out of the water. Athenian democracy is a sort of the hallmark case here. But a lot of other city-states look at democracy literally just as mob rule, where you've got a whole bunch of people that are not trained, that are dumb, that are just sort of yelling about whatever they want, that are reacting instead of proacting, that are angry so they'll do dumb things, they're sad so they'll do dumb things, they're hungry so they'll do dumb things. A lot of ancient Greeks don't think democracy is good, right? Nagarothi asks, or says, well, I guess that's a question. Weren't Greek oligarchies more akin to modern autocracies? We'll talk about oligarchy in just a second. The short answer is it depends, and that's a horrible answer to give. But we'll get around there, and I'll go through the whole thing in just a second. Also, welcome in. Hot take, democracy killed Socrates. It did. It did. Democracy did kill Socrates. The concept of democracy in the Greek world, and I said this at the top of the stream, it's very, very different than our modern world, right? In a modern world today, everybody that's a citizen gets the right to vote. We all have one vote. Our citizenship is expanded to people automatically. If you are eligible to vote, you can vote anywhere and for everything that is available to you. This is not the same as democratic practices in the ancient world. Most notably, and this might blow people's brains out of the water, most ancient cities had a very fluid concept of what law was. You can see references to things like constitutions, but in a lot of cases, the Constitution was more of a guideline. It wasn't necessarily a thing that had to be followed. In most of these situations, the Constitution wasn't even written down. There were just people that had precedent memorized. There weren't people making copies of the constitutions of a lot of these democracies and spreading them around for everybody to read. So even though everybody had the right to speak in the assembly if they were a citizen, and maybe had the right to vote in certain things, not everybody knew what was going on. The amount of information that was available to the average person during this ancient time period was very minimal. They voted very similar to the way that we do, though, mostly by instinct and gut and who we're the least angry at. But their constitutions were just sometimes non-existent, right? We don't actually have a really reliable version of even the Athenian constitution. Now, Aristotle wrote some stuff that he said was like the Constitution, and it's probably fairly accurate, but we can't really be sure. We're not really even 100% sure exactly how every single individual civic body inside most of these democracies worked. We know what they were called, right? Like, oh, those are the bouillon. Those are the people that are the elders, and there's going to be a small number of them, and they're going to have jurisdiction over these things. But wait, I'm a citizen and I get to vote. Oh, well, you don't get to vote in that. You got to wait till we vote on these things. Well, I want to vote on that. Well, then you've got to wait until you get selected to one of those, because not everybody gets into that one. Well, how do I get into that one? Well, you'll never get into that one because you're never going to be done for that. Well, what do I do then? Some of these positions in some of these democracies were literally chosen by lot. You were randomly chosen to be in some of these positions, right? Where you show up if you're interested, and they go, okay, we're gonna like reach in here. Oh, cool, you've pulled out the magic number. You get to be this position for this period of time, right? It's not nearly as constrained and by the book as we like to consider voting in democracy today. And they could do a lot of different stuff, right? We have a lot of constraints on how we can and can't vote, and for what we can and can't vote for. If you could convince an assembly to hold a vote on some things, you could convince them to vote on some things. Like some of the votes that happened in some of these was to kick people out of the city. Like you could literally banish somebody and remove their citizenship, right? This is where we get the word ostracize, and it's based on ostraca, ostraca, which is a piece of pottery shard. And you'd basically put your hands down in things, and you'd vote based on which one you wanted them to stay or go. And anyway, you could basically kick people out, right? Like you could just say as a group, we don't like you, we think you're bad for the city, so you're gone. We can't kick people out of the country by vote today, right? We can vote for people that kick people out of the country, but we can't do that by popular vote. It's a very different world. Many of the things that got voted on were really just done by tradition, right? Yeah, it's like Survivor, exactly. It's like Survivor at Athens, right? Or Survivor Sparta, right? You could just get voted off the island. There is not as much access to voting as we have today. Obviously, we've already talked about how many limits there were on who could vote. There is a lot more direct individual participation, which is something that is very different than the modern world. In the ancient world, most people that were citizens would show up, right? If there was going to be a public day of voting, most of the people that were citizens would show up. When we have votes in modern countries, we're lucky to get to 60% of the people that show up to vote. You would have 90+%, right? How big was the city of Greece? So if you look at some of the big cities like Corinth or Thebes or Athens or Sparta, you're probably looking at probably 50,000 people in the city and the immediately surrounding areas. But in Sparta, didn't they just kick people in that big hole? I mean, that big hole didn't actually exist. But in Sparta, their version of government didn't even include democracy at all. They didn't really like democracy. They made fun of the Athenians for being so weak that their leaders had to suck up to their people to ask their favor. Sparta had kings, kings plural. They had two kings, and they had a body of elders that were the advisors to the kings. And the body of elders were people that had lived through Spartan warfare long enough to the point that they could retire at 60, right? So these are people that were just hard as nails, veterans of countless battles. And if you made it through, you were just respected because you survived. It is sounding like there isn't a lot of written law. There isn't a lot of written law. There really, really wasn't. There was not a lot of written law. And it varied a ton from city to city. It absolutely varied from city to city. Again, this is another thing that we think about. Like when we think of Greek democracy, we think of like this city and this country where everybody is voting and everybody's doing it the same way. It was all done differently. Even Athens did things differently than their own colonies, right? There were Athenian colonies that had been set up by people of Athens that set up different versions of governments, right? So even between like parent and child concepts or colonies, you don't get the same the same level of government style. Why two kings? So one king could go to battle and one king could stay and run the city. If you have one king and he goes off to battle like he should and he dies, then you don't have a king. But if you have two kings, one of them goes to battle and one stays behind to run the city. And then if one of the king dies, they just pick another king. And they kind of take turns. It's designed to keep people from having a break where they don't have a king. JMR Killer, what's up, man? Welcome in. Well, I mean, they were clever in how they did things. They were also incredibly brutal. They were the largest enslavers in the Greek world. They forced tens of thousands of people into forced servitude to grow their food so that they could go off and do all of this fighting. They had incredibly tough standards for people to live by. Children were frequently thrown off the backside of the hill of the city. If they had any sort of birth defect, there was really no mercy. Young children were kept in military barracks and fed very little food and encouraged to beat each other to get to the food. If a kid died, you were not really supposed to mourn that kid. Spartan life is organized and effective as long as you are willing to buy into the ideology. Right. We forget those cities were city-states. Yes, they were more like countries. Indeed. They were a state where, well, the state government was sort of the centralized government, and then the individual cities around them that were their dependencies basically followed the same thing. What was Athenian public's involvement in designing laws? How substantial was the boule, given that people were elected to serve in it by lot? It seemed to have worked okay. Usually, the average person in Athens wasn't going to try to come up with a piece of legislation. Usually, the people were going to show up, and a certain group of people were going to be the ones that talked a lot, right? The ones that were trying to get things done, the ones that were in positions of influence. They were going to be the ones that kind of came up with the ideas, and the rest of the people, the majority of the people that were going to vote, were going to usually listen to the same small group of people and then vote based on their gut reaction to that. So the average Athenian probably wasn't going to spend a lot of time trying to properly word some sort of legal thing to present to the assembly. And the reason that some of this stuff is done by lot is that they were hoping that by doing so they would keep a flow of people, and that itself is an interesting idea because this doesn't allow you to do things like use the position for hereditary power or to cement your cement your participation in this position. But they also weren't given a lot of the critical typed decision-making powers, right? So just because you get chosen by lot doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be making life or death decisions about the future of the polis. You're probably going to be making smaller decisions like whether or not this person gets charged with a crime, or what crime they get charged with, or what kind of punishment that they have, or you're going to be advising people that are in other positions, or you're going to be acting as a sort of arbiter between people that are having legal cases. So this is a place where the average person's common sense would be sufficient to run the stuff. But it's not necessarily going to be like, you don't want to like choose your governor by lot. You don't want to choose your mayor or your general for your army by lot, right? Lots of intrigue indeed. It's kind of puzzling how political parties got around to the randomness in electing public officials. So most ancient Greek cities didn't really have political parties. That doesn't mean that they didn't have political leaders. It's just that they didn't have really organized political parties. Like, they didn't have Democrats and Republicans or Tories or Labor or the Greens or AFD or any of these political parties. You know, they didn't have political parties in the same way that we do. Individuals that were very good at oration, or individuals that were very wealthy, might have a lot of clients, and they might have a lot of political supporters because of their social position, and these can very much act like political parties, but it's not really the same idea. That you didn't see people that were like, all of the pro-tyrant people are going to be pro-tyrant people when the tyrant wins, but they're not going to continue being pro-tyrant if the tyrant gets killed, right? They're not just like the tyranny party. They're going to be supporters of the tyrant, and then when he goes away, they're going to have to pretend like they weren't supporters of the tyrant. Or if there's a particular legislation, you'll see people that like the legislation gang up behind it, but that's not really the same as a political party because we don't really have platforms. It's just, here's what we're going to talk about and who supports it and who doesn't. But anyway, the basic concept here, obviously, is that democracy in the ancient world is not a one-to-one comparison to democracy in our world. Now, there is this idea. This is aristocracy, right? The power of the best. So we want the best to have the power. Now, this is an interesting concept of government here. Most notably, how do we determine who is the best? What qualifies somebody as the best? And who gets to be considered the best? Do they consider themselves the best? But this is the power of the best. And this is how a lot of people argued that city-states should be run. The best people, through Pokemon tournaments, of course. Whoever has the best beard, obviously, right? If your beard is on point, you clearly are the best. It takes effort and skill and craft to grow a giant beard. This is why I'm stuck with just a goatee, and I'm obviously never going to be in a position of authority, right? But if you're Charizard, I'm sorry, anyway, this is a bit of a Pokemon joke. Anyway, there are going to be a few ways that you get to become the best. The best athlete? No. Usually, the aristocrats are the people that have the most social power, but it's not necessarily just the people who get there through wealth. There are people that are just very skilled speakers that aren't necessarily wealthy that end up becoming aristocratic. This is an idea that Aristotle really, really likes. Really, really, really likes this concept of aristocracy. Really likes the concept that the best people that are the most intelligent, that are the wisest, that are the best fit get to be the people that run things. And let me be very clear here. The difference between this and another form that we're about to talk about, oligarchy, is that ideally speaking, the aristocracy is the rule of the best, or using the power of the best, but with the specific angle of being for the betterment of all, right? The aristocrats are not running the government for the betterment of themselves. And this is a big difference in the way that we use the word aristocracy today. Frequently, when we use the word aristocracy today, we mean wealthy people that are running the government for their own benefit. That's not the way that the ancient Greek world would have seen aristocrats. These were the people that were supposedly dedicated to the public good. And there is a lot of philosophical delineations that sort of go into how an aristocrat is supposed to work. And the degrees of some of this stuff is very, very narrow. And if you look at some of the justification behind aristocracy, it almost seems paradoxical or perhaps contradictory. I feel like military service and wealth would be the two ways that wow the public. Well, I mean, that's definitely two ways to get there for sure. So aristocrats and the version of, or the model of aristocracy is technically against monarchies, right? They don't like the idea of monarchies because monarchs aren't necessarily chosen or appointed or acknowledged. They are just put there because of heredity, right? So aristocracy, not really a thing. They don't like this idea of heredity. I did mention that Plato has this idea of the philosopher king. He argues for an aristocracy as well. The philosopher king, though, is not the same as a monarch. It's very, very... Well, I mean, technically is a monarch, but he's a monarch that is there because the citizens of the polis created the perfect scenario for this person to be raised in their polis. It's almost like, how do I say this the right way? When Plato describes the philosopher king, it's almost like the Kwisatz Haderach in Dune, where the Bene Gesserit sisterhood spends all of this time playing all of this politics and all of this like bloodline stuff to create the perfect ruler. Plato argues that in order to get to the point where you can have a philosopher king, you have to have the perfect government and the perfect city and the perfect setting for this person to arrive. And it's not like a normal monarch. So technically, aristocracy against monarchy. Did they consider going for a technocracy? No, they didn't have Twitter. It's a very modern term, yeah. We tend to attribute noble birth to aristocracy in modern understandings. Yes, this is very true. This is very true, right? The people that were the rich families that had all the power, that are in power forever. But ancient aristocracy, not big on heredity. What's up, Radical? Are you familiar with Alexis de Tocqueville? Yeah. George Washington could have been something like a philosopher king. Oh, never mind. No, not... Well, so there's an interesting thing here. and I'm getting about 1,000. No, I'm getting like about 2,000 years ahead of myself. No, wait. I'm getting substantially ahead of myself. In the Enlightenment, where a lot of our subsidiary modern ideas of politics and government come from, there is another idea that arrives that's referred to as the enlightened despot. And this is something that people like Voltaire, people like Hobbes argues for in Leviathan, where the person that is in charge of the government is a perfect example of Enlightenment philosophy. They are driven by science. They are driven by logic and reason. They are not given to emotion. They are not given to continuing tradition just for the sake of tradition. They're not given over to falling for superstition or things like that. And a lot of these people in the Enlightenment argued that you could have a monarchy similar to the Philosopher King, but they would call it, again, an enlightened despot or something that would be different. And it's not the same one-to-one idea. But if we were trying to come up with something that we could call George Washington, we could try to argue that maybe he was an enlightened despot. And in the process of becoming an enlightened despot, he surrendered power to the people by establishing things like, voting and democracy, et cetera, et cetera. And Modern Heredity is a TV show. I thought Heredity was a movie. What's up, Noger? Welcome in. That would be great. Wish we had that for sure. Frederick II is the closest to a philosopher king. Oh, that's an interesting take. We could have a long discussion about that. I don't necessarily have time to, but that would be a fun one. Frederick II is very well read, very well written, and tried. Plenty of foibles there. Plenty of foibles. Now, we have this aristocracy. Ooh, I forgot to go through the... so technically against monarchies. We're against hereditary position. And aristocracy was also against democracy, which is not something that a lot of people are like, oh, modern aristocracy is against democracy. But the idea here is the aristocracy was against democracy on a broad scale, right? But it was okay if they used it among themselves, right? Like if the aristocrats gathered to make a government decision and they did so by voting consensus, then democracy was okay because then it was it was the best people voting. The reason they were against broad-based democracy, even if they were in cities that had democracy, was that they didn't think that the average person really knew what they were doing. They didn't necessarily think that the average individual was going to be able to vote intelligently. They didn't think that the average person was going to be able to vote with informed consensus or without bringing in emotion or without bringing in some sort of bias. So you could do voting, but only among the aristocracy. We have the best voters, the great voters, great voters. I got more votes than anybody ever did. Right. You mixed up Heredity and one of the million horror TV series, I guess. Perhaps so. I agree with this. The average person isn't great. Maybe they were right, question mark. I don't want to say that. I think that in many ways the system has failed the voters and education has failed the voters. I do recognize the individual agency that one should take when voting. And in that way, if a person goes to vote without thinking about it, or they go to vote for hate, or they go to vote for revenge or something like that, I don't necessarily support that rationale. I still respect the fact that they get to vote. I do wish everybody would vote informed, and I do wish everybody would vote rationally and as objectively as possible. But I do think that having more people voting is okay. I am not pro-aristocracy. Because aristocracy is one step away from this one. Oligarchy. Athenians didn't have universal suffrage, so even their democracy worked out. Yeah, they didn't. We talked about that. I think that might have been before maybe you popped in, Nagarathi. What's up, Breathius? Welcome in. If we had more voters, we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place. If everybody that voted, if everybody that could have voted, there's actually no statistical guarantee that President Trump would not have won. The voter base is shifting demographically speaking, and historically it has been the case in America that when more people vote, Democrats win. But the analysis of last year's November vote has been really fascinating, and a lot of political science people are in the position now of saying it doesn't really benefit a lot for Democrats to have a big voter turnout, because the shift in demographics and population, especially in swing states, tends to now favor Republicans in higher voter turnout situations. It's a very, very detailed argument to be made, but I read several papers where people are talking about how in many areas high voter turnout actually cost Democrats some of the states in the last election. So, but Borethius, this is really, really new stuff. So, and I only know about it because I have access to academic journals that are publishing things on this, like this year, right? The masses should be able to vote their values into governing somehow, and representation seemed like it would be a way to do that. But bad information absolutely does wreck it. Sure. We ended up with an oligarchy with extra steps. Is oligarchy essentially what's in Iron-Blooded Orphans? So, no, what they have there is basically corporatism, where governments basically run the government. You could say that the heads of the companies are oligarchs, but they're not acting in unison. We're talking here about a Gundam TV show, by the way. This is Iron-Blooded Orphans, which is my favorite Gundam full-length series. And the government and the solar system is set up around several very, very large corporations who effectively have independent government control. It's very similar to like the East India Company, if you know anything about the British East India Company, that was originally started as a company but ended up having basically its own power to like raise armies and make laws and conquer territory and stuff like that. Didn't the Roman Empire have problems with oligarchs? Not usually. Sometimes. But I'll get to the definition here in just a second. I'm trying to catch up with chat. I remember reading once about the Praetorians auctioning off the emperor's title. So the Praetorian Guard was the bodyguard of the emperor. So they weren't necessarily in a political position. They were just the person that could sneak into the emperor's bedchamber, and at the particular time that event happened, the Roman world was in such a shambles that the Praetorian Guard, which was a legion of soldiers, was the strongest legion in striking distance of the capital city, which put them in a really unique position. But they weren't trying to be government themselves. They were just sick of the existing governor and wanted a bonus. So they killed the emperor and then said, whoever can give us the biggest bonus, we'll just hail you emperor. And then with the power of our legion, we will make sure that nobody else comes to get you. So that's I mean, it's kind of an oligarchic move, but they didn't have power because of their clout. They just had power because of their literal physical prowess. The World of Snow Crash was like that too. Lots of cyberpunk does. Yeah, lots of cyberpunk stuff. Okay, so what is an oligarchy? Well, an oligarchy is the rule of the few. Now, this word gets used multiple ways, even in the ancient world. Even in the ancient world, we still get different uses of this word oligarchy. So, sometimes the word gets used very, very broadly. And you'll see some city-states calling other city-states an oligarchy when the city-state that they're describing as an oligarchy would describe themselves as an aristocracy, right? So some people think oligarchy equals anything that isn't democracy, monarchy, or tyranny. So if it's not democracy, if it's not monarchy or tyranny, it's oligarchy. And they would not use the word aristocracy at all. And at that point, an aristocracy would be considered an oligarchy. Now, sometimes in usually places where oligarchy happened, in places where aristocracy happened, you will see oligarchy described as the perversion of aristocracy, where the best stop being the best and stop working for the good of the city and start working for the good of themselves. And this is usually the way that we use the term in the modern world. But technically speaking, oligarchies aren't necessarily just based on wealth. There can be a lot of different ways that an oligarchy gets into positions of power, right? Like we just mentioned in Sparta, where the age is a part of this, right? Where for you to be part of the assembly that advises the kings, you have to be a particular age. So the government of Sparta was an oligarchy. It wasn't an aristocracy. I mean, they might say that they're the best, but their government style here is because they're small, their age is advanced enough to get into these positions, and that's how they run stuff, right? Like even if you were a citizen of Sparta, you might not be in the government body that runs things. So there we go. I think maybe somebody in chat mentioned this earlier, that military prowess. If you were a person that just had amazing amounts of military prowess, you could get political power out of that. You could do extraordinary service to the polis, right? You could do something like fund a public work or offer a really big festival or do something like that where you're giving from your beneficence to the city, and then the polis will then award you by placing you among the oligarchy. You could also just get a whole bunch of people together and run a coup, right? We see several references historically of people that set up oligarchies where it was really just like a group of people that had a whole bunch of money and a whole bunch of people that were going to support them, and they just decided we're going to take over the city. And so this was a very like negative set up oligarchy. They just took over and kicked everybody else out and said that we're running the city, right? So it's not always economically based. In the modern world, an oligarch is almost always going to be considered some sort of individual that has a lot of wealth. They're in a very small group of people. They're really mostly looking out for themselves. They're not necessarily looking out for the good of the people. It's not necessarily something that's positive. So that kind of stuff, right? All right. Do I remember why he didn't pay. He didn't pay up, Rhetheus. Isn't the confusion in part owed to the Peloponnesian War and Athens and Sparta superimposing regimes in different polis? Well, not necessarily. The debate was existent before the Peloponnesian War. Quite common before that, often set up with the help of tyrants, not against them. So yeah, this gets to this theory, and if you've ever studied Greek history, or if you were a kid in U.S. history, I'm sorry, in a U.S. history class, so not a class on the history of the United States, but a history class inside of the United States, you may have seen this little diagram where there's a progression from democracy to tyranny, or tyranny to democracy. Like it moves in this same way. Like it always moves in the same direction. That didn't happen. That is a creation of historians that didn't read very well. And it's really nice to say, oh, well, here's how governments always change, and it's always going to follow this pathway. It's going to start this way, and then it's going to turn into this thing, and then it's going to turn into that thing, and then it's going to turn into that thing. And then this thing's going to happen because of that, and then it's going to go back to this thing. That's not the way that it happens. Oligarchies can pop up anywhere for any reason. Sometimes they do show up as a way to support tyrants. Sometimes a tyrant shows up and picks a whole bunch of people that are going to be his cronies, and then somebody ends up killing the tyrant, and the cronies try to stay in power. Sometimes the people just decide that they hate the existing assembly, so they go break into the assembly and kill everybody and say, we're the new assembly, right? There's not necessarily a guaranteed reason why an oligarchy is going to show up or not show up. But anyway, this is a lot of stuff, and we have added a lot of ideology for the night, right? This is a kind of a big jump in government and political thinking here. And this is going to fairly dramatically change the course of Western history, and the governments that most Western countries have today, and many countries that aren't Western but influenced by Western governments, are going to have some of these same elements, because we don't really change as much as it seems sometimes. We have the same sort of mechanisms, and we just tweak them and do them differently, right? It's not always going to be a one-to-one comparison, but the spirit of a lot of this stuff is the same. And when we have a method that approaches a problem and offers a solution in this way, and that solution tends to work more frequently than not, that solution is going to continue to be used through time, right? So there's a reason why we still use some of these words to describe governments today. There's a reason why we still have citizenship and stuff like this today, because these ideas have merit and value, and they perpetuate through time because of these things, right? So people just wanting to rule and people just wanting to be ruled. Kind of, sort of. How encompassing is the term oligarchy? I imagine the pure form of it is ruled by a group of equals. Can it include someone who seems to hold all the power, but there's a few people with a lot of influence over that ruler? Not everybody that's in the few has to have the same level of political clout. You can have an oligarchy where you have like oligarch prime and sub-oligarchs and oligarch minoris. Not everybody in the oligarchy club has to have the same amount of power and influence. But if we're talking about just the actual definition, it literally just means the rule of a few. So we can define that phrase few in many ways, right? Are we talking about a powerful few? Are we talking about a wealthy few? When I discuss this in modern sociology, I give the definition that an oligarchy is a governmental social structure that is run by a few very wealthy individuals, right? Because in the modern world, when we see oligarchies, it's almost always based on wealth. Yeah, sure, if we did make them sound like Transformers, right? There's Jazzligarch, there's I don't know, like, is it Megagarch or is it Olatron? Probably Olatron. I think Olatron probably matters better than Megagark. Anyway, um, let me catch up. Ooh, chat's moving. Lapta, welcome in. I thought we were an autonomous collective. You're fooling yourself. I actually thought about making one of the episodes of this show a point by point reaction to the anarcho-syndicalist peasant from Monty Python. Like, legitimately thought what I should do is just take that clip and play it and explain every point of it in sequence. But I would have already covered enough of that stuff that it just seems kind of silly. And I also don't necessarily know if I could get away with playing that whole clip. The Deceptigarchs, right? The Oligoobers. Funnily enough, the oligarchy of Miletus set up an Anaximander philosopher. Yep. Kleptocracy. Kakistoc. Yeah. Funny modern words that we've tried to make sound Greek so that they sound better. Grimlark. Yeah, Grimlark. That's a good one. The rule of the scary. Just because someone to be taught through a sword at you. Is there a city or a country that did away with citizenship? Plenty of them. Plenty of them. When Rome fell, citizenship pretty much evaporated in Western Europe for a while. A lot of the countries that were set up afterwards didn't really have the same concept of citizenship because they were being run mostly by barbarian tribes who didn't have the concept of citizenship. And when the locals tried to enforce the concept of citizenship, it just didn't go over very well. Help, I'm being oppressed. Did Persia have an idea of citizenship? Not in the way that we're talking about today. That stuff, so the Persia that's present at this time would be the Achaemenid Persians, and they really don't have a lot of these same ideologies. The Parthian Persians probably wouldn't have either. You may, and this is going way out on a limb, you may be able to make an argument that the Sassanid Persians had some concept of citizenship in this sort of same structure, but it's not really the same. It's more of an ideological difference instead of a governmental difference. What's interesting, though, is that the Sassanid Persian government falls to the Muslim Caliphate, the Rashidun Caliphate, and we can argue pretty conclusively that they had concepts of citizenship. Now, it was part of the community membership, part of the Ummah inside of Islam, but that conveyed you a lot of rights as opposed to somebody that was not in the Ummah. So that it's a version of religious citizenship. So there's that. Did Roman law have clear legal protection for non-citizens? Nope, not usually. You had some property rights, but not a lot. You didn't necessarily have a lot of... If the dispute was between two non-citizens, sure. But if the dispute was between a citizen and a non-citizen, you were cooked. I think non-citizens were nothing to them. Yeah, there's some nuance there. There were certain laws that were just expected to happen within the realm of Rome, but it was usually you can't do this to citizens. So if you were a non-citizen, you were going to be expected to act certain ways. But if you were a citizen, you were kind of much more free to do a little bit more of whatever you wanted to. HBO's Rome portrayed Mark Antony as kind of an idiot. Do you think that was true? I've seen Rome, and it's actually quite good. They get a lot of the cultural stuff correct. They get a lot of the set dressing and a lot of the dress and a lot of the like food and that kind of stuff. Very, very well done. The narrative obviously has some changes for dramatic effect. Was Mark Antony as big of a kind of a goofy goober as he was in Rome? Probably not. That was probably exacerbated a bit. He was definitely egotistical. He was definitely very sure of himself. The latter seasons in the show where he goes down to Egypt and shacks up with Cleopatra and effectively begins to act as if he is ruler of everything. I mean, that's actually based on history, and he does that stuff. That era of his life is probably the most accurate to the show, but even then, it's not that bad. They changed him for dramatic effect. It's good to have him, especially playing against the much more straight character, and here I'm using the term like you have the goofy character and then you have the straight character, like the one that's very serious. And the way that they played Caesar in the show was like he was the very serious person, and it was good to have Antony, the kind of goofy person that was going to play off of him and kind of poke fun at him. The straight man versus the color commentary. Exactly, Frank. Exactly, right. And Octavian is like the smartest man alive in the show. That's pretty accurate, though. Like, they do Octavian pretty well in that show. Augustus. So Octavian is the adopted son of Julius Caesar that goes on to become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. That dude is brilliant. One of the best politicians ever alive. One of the smartest, furthest ahead thinking, cleverest, wisest rulers that's ever existed. Brutal, horrible, not somebody I would necessarily invite to my wedding, but incredibly skilled at what he did. It's hard to imagine they didn't differentiate between different classes as non-citizens. The issue here is where we're living, right? Were there many Greeks in Rome also treated as harshly as other war captives? Yeah, I mean, if you weren't Roman, you were you just weren't Roman. They didn't really care very much who you were. You may have gotten by a little bit better because you weren't straight up barbarian, right? Like, they would have probably looked at a Greek person with a little bit more, perhaps, empathy than somebody that was like a Gaul, or a Pict or a Scot or something like that. But I don't know. That's getting into like a lot of supposition. I've not even heard of the show Plebes. So, all right. Let's see who is streaming so that we can go do a raid. It's Plebs. Okay. Maybe we go raid a new person. Let's see who's streaming. I wonder if anybody's streaming history. Makes me think of Polybius and how he was how makes me think of Polybius and how was he perceived by the Romans. Eh. Um, the Romans like to read, so, I mean, not the most horrible ever, but there are 5 people streaming under the history tag, and we're the biggest one, so let's not do that. Kyle wants to do standard question book. We can do that. I found a new way to do this when I was streaming over the weekend. So we're going to go to this camera setting to do standard question book. This is the standard question book and home study outline. It is a very, very old book from 1917, and it is designed to help you study for a college class. I don't have the rest of the information from the college class. We just have the question book, but that's okay because we do it like this. So we're going to pick a random page and then a random question on that page, and we're going to see if I can answer it. And if I can't, we'll look it up. But let's go with, I don't know, like I like this one. Let's see, like right here. And then we're going to open, and we're going to go, I think, from this side of the, okay, well, whatever, from this side of the page. Between whom and when did the 100 Years' War occur? Name King of France at the beginning and the close. Between whom and when did the 100 Years' War occur? Not the War of the Roses. That's a different war. I do think, though, that I can do something pretty interesting here as an answer to this question, and that is going to be this and this. The War of the Roses is substantially later. Do I still have that one? Maybe not. Maybe 'tis on the YouTube, or as Lumpy might call it, YouTube. I am not going to wrap the answer. No, I was going to post a link to the 100 Years' War video. So if you want to know the answer to that question, click that link and go watch me talk about the 100 Years' War for 2 hours and 10 minutes. I don't think I could. Well, I mean, I guess I could do interpretive dance for the whole thing, but if we're just really being honest, nobody wants to. Well, I mean, I guess I say nobody wants, and then some people are like, "Oh no, I want to see that deeply." I don't want to do interpretive dance for the entire thing. I can sing "Will I," which is a song by Ilharmonics that I got ridiculed for to no end because I liked, even though it's a decent hip-hop song regardless. So this is, anyway, France and England. It's going to start because a guy named Philip IV becomes a king. This is in the early 1300s, like 1320s. I think it's 1320s. I don't know, 1320 something. And there's an issue with Charles the Fifth, Charles the Fourth. Charles the Fourth dies, and then there's a whole bunch of fighting about who gets to be king. And the last of the kings is Charles the Seventh at the end of it. and he basically kills everybody else in his way. But it goes on for a very, very long time. So there we go. Weird to think about 3 to 4 generations all fighting in the same war. Sure. We can have rapping intermissions between the interpretive dancing. That's true. We could. What's up, John Collector? Though some people confuse them, Shane is a history teacher, not a gym teacher. That's fair. That's fair. Who needs that many Charleses? Well, they also had several more. I think they go to Charles the Ninth. I think the last Charles is Charles the Ninth. I don't think they have a Charles the 10th. Now I'm questioning myself. I'm going to have to Google this. I think Charles the Ninth is the last one, though. Oh, there is a Charles the 10th of France. Oh, he's in the 1700s. Yeah, that's like my... That's my weak spot. Oh, he was king for like 6 years. From 1824 to 1830. Yeah. So there we go. All right. I was going to see if there was a person that we could raid. Let's see if anybody's doing politics. I'm sure that there are people talking politics. The question is going to be whether or not we want to raid them. They should make a show about it and call it Charles and Chars. They could. They could very well do so. Wow. Of the top people talking politics, they're all talking about either Israel and Palestine or Trump. There we go. Let's try to find somebody smaller, maybe. I don't know about this. Maybe we'll just call it... the dog is outside and barking at something. I mean, it's okay. The dog is just going crazy, though. Yeah, we'll just call it. I don't necessarily feel like doing a raid. Of course, last time I said that, Paradox Moose was like, well, so-and-so is streaming, so you gotta go raid them or you're a horrible person, and then I ended up doing it. I could always raid T-Pain. Is T-Pain actually streaming right now? T-Pain is streaming right now. T-Pain has 815 people on his channel and is not actually on his channel. There are 2 white people and what looks to be a Latino lady talking about stuff on T-Pain's channel right now. So I don't think we'll be raiding T-Pain. I think we're just going to call it. It is always fun to just stop. So we're just going to do that. So thanks everybody for coming in. Let me move over to the thank you screen. Thank you to everybody that supports the channel. You can see people that have subscriber badges. These are people that are subscribing on the channel. Thank you so much for being a subscriber. Claire Stormblessed, a subscriber from tonight. You can also see people here on the thank you page that are patrons on Patreon. A special thank you to new patron on Patreon, Ivan Neo. I don't know if Ivan is hanging around, perhaps lurking or something in chat, but thank you so much for your addition to the Patreon list. You can also see people that have sent me books. If you are interested in getting on Patreon, There is one subscription. There's one tier. It is literally called the alternative subscription. It's $5. It's what Twitch subscriptions used to be. And I will never change that. And it's literally there just so people that want to support the channel don't have to give Jeff Bezos money. And you are welcome to do that. You can also hit books and see a list of books on Amazon if you want to send me something to read. Not that I need more books, but some people are always asking, hey, what do you want to read? And there we go. But we will just call it there, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else. Stay safe and don't die. There we go. That's it, Noger. Hope everybody's going to have a good one, and I'll see you next time.